In his own opinion, it is the greatest work that he has yet written. Beethoven played it for me recently, and I believe that heaven and earth will tremble when it is performed. This was how Beethoven's pupil Ferdinand Ries described the Eroica Symphony in a letter to the music publisher Nikolaus Simrock. With this work, Beethoven launches into his heroic style and, in the same stroke, elevates the genre of the symphony to an unprecedented level of expression and grandness of conception. For better or for worse, the image of the heroic Beethoven has always captivated the popular imagination. As musicologist Scott Burnham writes, with this one work, Beethoven is said to liberate music from the stays of 18th century convention, single-handedly bringing music into a new age by giving it a transcendent voice equal to Western man's most cherished values. In the summer of 1802, while he was staying at Heiligenstadt, Beethoven worked on a set of variations for piano based on the final dance from his ballet The Creatures of Prometheus. Beethoven's initial conception for his Third Symphony stemmed directly from the Prometheus variations, more widely known today as the Eroica variations, which would form the basis for the finale of the symphony. The dance on which the piano variations and the symphony's finale are based was known as the Englischer because it originated as a popular English country dance in which a line of women and a line of men would change partners during its course. But why would Beethoven be evoking an English country dance? It turns out that this dance was considered quite progressive at the time. As Friedrich Schiller opines, I can think of no more fitting image for the ideal of social conduct than an English dance, composed of many complicated figures and perfectly executed. It is the most perfectly appropriate symbol of the assertion of one's own freedom and regard for the freedom of others. Considered in this light, Beethoven's allusion to the Englischer in the finale of his symphony may actually serve to symbolize an ideal society. So how would such an ideal society be brought about? As in the story of Prometheus, it would be through the actions of an enlightened heroic figure. Although Beethoven was probably not thinking of any particular heroic association for the symphony at first, by June of 1803 he decided that the symphony would be a characteristic or program symphony, the subject of which would be the Promethean figure of Beethoven's time, Napoleon Bonaparte. For Beethoven, Napoleon seemed to be on a mission to bring humanity closer to Enlightenment ideals, and Beethoven originally planned to dedicate the symphony to him. It is therefore easy to understand Beethoven's disillusionment when he received news that Napoleon had declared himself emperor. Beethoven reportedly cried out in rage, "Now he will trample on all the rights of man and only indulge his ambition. He will exalt himself above all others and become a tyrant." Beethoven violently erased Napoleon's name from the title page of his symphony, and the work was subsequently renamed Heroic Symphony, after which appear the words "composed to celebrate the remembrance of a great man." Beethoven knew from the beginning that the finale of his symphony would be a variation movement based on the Prometheus theme. With this goal in mind, he worked backwards and derived the main theme of the first movement from ideas found in the Prometheus theme. The bass motion from tonic to dominant and back serves as the skeletal structure for the main theme, though Beethoven inverts the direction of the two B-flats. He then fleshes out this structure with the E-flat G E-flat motion from the start of the Prometheus melody and the chromatic slide from the Prometheus bass line, but descending rather than ascending. The result appears disarmingly simple, a triadic fanfare-like figure followed by a troubling chromatic slide. If this theme represents the hero, then this hero does not appear completely sure of himself yet. Victory is not guaranteed, but must be hard-won, and it is in the ensuing titanic struggle that lies the enduring appeal of this music. Incidentally, an overture to an early opera by Mozart seems to anticipate this theme, though the resemblance is likely coincidental. Beethoven initially planned a slow introduction in 4/4, but he quickly abandoned the idea in favor of two powerful chords. These were originally supposed to be dominant seventh chords, delivered like a kind of massive upbeat gesture, rather than the straightforward downbeat placement of the two tonic hammer blows in the final version. But in a way, the original dominant seventh chords are still present. They lie hidden in the passage that leads back to the repeat of the exposition. We heard that the main theme in its very first appearance in the cellos already drifts off into harmonic uncertainty. When the theme is subsequently taken up by the winds and horns in a higher register, Beethoven extends it through sequential treatment of the triadic motive. In other words, the main theme is never presented as something static and fully formed. It is always evolving. Then, in a contrasting phrase that begins by inverting the triadic motive that we just heard, Beethoven introduces a leaping figure, cast as a hemiola within the prevailing triple meter. Take note of this material, especially the rhythmic tension that it generates, which will be fully exploited in the development section. The transition begins with a glorious restatement of the triadic idea from the main theme before evolving once again in a new direction. Much of the material that follows will be similarly fluid and transitory, imparting a relentlessly striving character to the music. Because everything appears to be constantly developing, it is hard to determine where the transition ends and the subordinate theme begins. Some commentators propose that there are multiple subordinate themes starting as early as measure 45. Or perhaps at measure 57. While others suggest that there is a very long transition and the subordinate theme does not begin until measure 83. Each of these interpretations has its merits, and I think that it is a certain measure of the quality of the music that it can support contrasting interpretations. Personally, though, I prefer the last interpretation. The material beginning at measure 83 has a gentler, more lyrical quality that is typically associated with subordinate themes. Note that the expressive chromatic motions embedded in the texture are possibly derived from the chromatic tail of the main theme. The closing theme is anything but a straightforward confirmation of B-flat major, the dominant. Consider, for example, the rhythmically disruptive repetition of a single harmony in measures 128 to 131. And the harsh, simultaneous sounding of the leading tone diminished seventh chord with the tonic pedal in measure 147. These disquieting moments in the closing theme already anticipate the powerful rhythmic and harmonic tension in the development section. The development section is quite long and intensifies the drama of this restless, dynamic movement. The main theme is never far away from the action. It is juxtaposed or combined with other materials, creating the sense of an epic struggle against various forces. Cast in minor mode, the triadic motive from the main theme engages in frisson-inducing modulations from C minor to C sharp minor to D minor. Listening to this passage, one can imagine the upsurge of gritty determination as the hero charges into battle. But the battle does not go well. The commotion of a short fugato passage culminates in a terrifying amplification of the leaping hemiola figure from measure 25. We are overwhelmed by 32 measures of blaring, mostly dissonant chords that destroy any sense of metric regularity. This is the point of maximum harmonic and rhythmic tension, signifying a devastating setback for the hero. The last strident climactic harmony features a grating semitone clash. Interestingly, if we were to transpose this harmony down a fifth, it would become easier to see that Beethoven reuses the same harmony in another famous frightening moment. In the wake of this apparent defeat, a new theme emerges in the distant key of E minor. The theme that Beethoven originally sketched out can be found in the lower register. The counter melody above it was added later. After some scrutiny, however, we discover that this theme is not new after all. It is really the main theme under a more lyrical, lamenting guise. The counter melody amplifies the lamenting character as its pitch content foreshadows the opening theme of the funeral march that is to come. The retransition is based on the leaping hemiola figure from measure 25 presented in the bass, above which the main theme becomes interwoven in an imitative texture. And for the first time, we catch a hopeful glimpse of the main theme in its perfected form, a pure fanfare without the uncertainty of a chromatic descent. One of the most memorable moments in the entire symphony occurs before the start of the recapitulation, when a solo horn seems to enter too soon with the main theme in the tonic, while the string tremolos are still whispering dominant harmony. But Beethoven actually planned this early entrance from the very first draft. It is like seeing the wake outlines of the hero through the dissipating fog of war. In the recapitulation, we hear the main theme presented with its chromatic flaw for the last time. The horn confidently announces the perfected version of the main theme immediately after. Nevertheless, we will have to wait until the coda to hear this perfected version in the tonic. The long coda is like a second development section. It begins with statements of the main theme, wondrously falling from E-flat major to D-flat major to C major, as if to balance the upward modulations at the start of the development section. The lamenting version of the main theme first heard in the development section also makes its last appearance, reminding us of the nadir in the evolution of this theme before we progress towards its zenith. Softly at first, the horns played the perfected version of the main theme in the tonic. And other instruments gradually joined in to glorify the theme, building up in texture and volume to an apotheosis in full orchestra. However, this apotheosis subsides rather quickly. The hero has accomplished a great deal, but his task is not yet complete. The second movement is a funeral march. Dramatically, we can imagine that after the heroic battle of the first movement, those who have fallen must be commemorated. Funeral marches were common in French revolutionary music. These marches would be written in a grand style, featuring the massive sonorities of military instruments such as drums and brass. Beethoven had already attempted to capture the spirit of such music in his funeral march for the death of a hero from the A-flat major piano sonata which he wrote a few years earlier. But the symphonic funeral march would surpass the earlier attempt for piano solo both in its impressive scale and depth of expression. Though the movement is essentially in ternary form, the structure is not straightforward due to constant variation and the addition of interludes. Cast in C minor, the movement begins with a somber tune played in the lowest, darkest register of the violins. The basses seem to evoke muffled drums. The middle section is in C major, with soothing arpeggiation occurring both in the melody and in the accompaniment. But very quickly, the music builds to a sustained fortissimo harmony. This passage is strikingly similar to the middle section of the funeral march from the piano sonata, Opus 26. In the return of section A, the opening theme grows into a double fugue that conveys a stoic nobility of expression even in the most profound grief. After the fugue dies away, the opening theme is recalled, though it quickly trails off on a precarious high A-flat. Then we get a sudden jolt from the cellos and basses. The experience is like an involuntary flashback. The strident brass and the merciless drive of the bass line revivify the memory of the battle in which valor and tragedy have become inseparable. The coda begins with a hopeful new material that implies D-flat major, but it disintegrates into a numbly nondescript rhythm, and the gravity of C minor proves inescapable. One last glimmer of hope arises as the movement seems to end with a piggedy third, but the E natural turns out to be impermanent and the glimmer of hope is extinguished. The movement concludes by recalling the opening theme, now broken up into sighs and fragments. It's as if the eulogist has become too deeply affected to produce coherent speech. As such, the funeral march has turned inwards, from solemn public commemoration to poignant personal lamentation. In the summer of 1803, Beethoven began working on the third movement, initially referring to it as a minuetto serioso. Nevertheless, the movement would eventually take shape not as a minuet, but as an exhilarating scherzo, a remarkable revitalization after the mourning of the preceding movement. The scherzo is built on two basic ideas: an incessant rhythmic activity based on rapid repetitions and alternations, out of which emerges a folk tune which becomes more dominant as the scherzo progresses. Tonally, the folk tune initially appears reluctant to settle in the home key, choosing instead to explore B-flat major and later F major. When the tune is finally given in the tonic in measure 93, the entire orchestra celebrates. In the trio, the three horns are featured, highlighting their ancient association with the hunt. The triadic idea that they present also harks back to the main theme of the first movement. There is a wonderful rhythmic complication in the reprise of the scherzo. Offbeat accents in 3/4 are transformed into even half notes in cut time. In his sketch of this movement, Beethoven wrote that there would be eine fremde Stimme, a strange voice, in the coda. Here the word strange apparently refers to material that is foreign to the movement, a rising three-note chromatic line, reversing and resolving the troubling chromatic descent from the main theme of the first movement. As mentioned, the symphony culminates in a set of variations on the final dance from the Creatures of Prometheus, the Englischer or English dance that symbolizes the ideal society that ultimately takes shape through the efforts of the hero. Variation form can be effectively employed to offer different takes on a single theme. However, this can seem rather static. Beethoven solves this problem by introducing continuous development that transcends the sectionalism inherent in variation form, making it much more dynamic. In fact, I think that the movement could also be understood as unfolding in three large sections that function somewhat like the exposition, development, and recapitulation of sonata form. A stormy introduction, marked allegro molto, dramatically implies G minor before turning to the dominant seventh of E flat major. Then, rather than presenting a fully harmonized theme right away, Beethoven gives us only the baseline of the theme, and the first three variations gradually build up the texture until the melody is found. Beethoven had already employed the same strategy in the Prometheus variations for piano, and the overall effect is a dynamic process whereby the theme appears to be constructed before us in real time. Having presented the theme, Beethoven proceeds to develop it in the first Fugado section. The ensuing variations also have a developmental quality. They explore different tonalities and feature contrasting characters. Note, for example, the contrast between the light, agile flute solo in D major from Variation 5 and the heavy, vigorous Turkish march that follows. The second Fugato, in contrast to the first one, serves to confirm the tonic, building up to a climax where the theme's bass line is heard in all its glory. After this, we get a slow, expressive variation where the tune is transformed into a hymn. The hymn grows to colossal proportions in the next variation, as if addressed to the whole of humanity. But this radiant moment is marred by a subsequent build-up to a powerful cadence in G minor. You'll recall that G minor was implied in the introduction to the movement, so it appears that we still have some unfinished business to attend to. Plagued by uncertainty, the music subsides and becomes more inert. Then, abruptly, the explosive energy of the introduction returns, allowing Beethoven to neutralize the threat of G minor once and for all and launch into an unreservedly jubilant closure in which the theme is condensed into its essence of tonic and dominant polarity. Thanks for watching.